Okay, hey, Austin Meyer here. We're going to talk about X-Plane 1150 Vulkan, which is out now. I'm at Mike's, which is a pretty isolated place. Keeping my 6-foot social distance from Mike Brown. Mike, it's Mike. What does your wife do for a living?
She's a nurse. Nothing to worry about. You should have known that.
I just didn't think of it. Okay. We're just doing the presentation and hope that we're not made fools of later. Okay, so here we go. X-Plane 1150 is out now with Vulkan and metal. So this is going to change my world in that every time we do a video on anything related to X-Plane, the only comment to the video will be, you should be doing Vulkan and metal. So Vulkan and metal is out, and what we're going to talk today a little bit about is Vulkan metal, what it does, how it works, why we're doing it, and Steam as well. So let's start with how OpenGL works. Okay, let's start with that. OpenGL, obviously the graphics that we used to use. It was designed decades ago, by the way.
And the graphics you've used for 10 plus years, or almost
30
20
years.
However many years.
Yeah,
forever.
Yeah, this is what we've used for 30 years. So the way OpenGL works is, I'm breaking this down to 3 columns. Us, this is the Laminar Research source code. OGL, this is the OpenGL driver installed on your computer. And you, what you get to see on the monitor, okay? That's the flow of information. The first thing we do is we ask for a shader, right? It becomes dark, it becomes nighttime. Now we need a new shader to let the pretty runway lights up, right? So we tell OpenGL, oh, it's dark now. You gotta load a shader to let the runway lights be beautiful in the dark. OpenGL says, oh, you want a new shader. I didn't know that, right? I didn't know it was going to become night just because it's become night every 24 hours forever. I didn't know what happened now. And it literally compiles the shader, turning that source code into executables. And that could take like a 20th of a second or a 10th of a second or something just asinine like that. And the whole thing just pauses while the shader is compiled, and then once it's compiled, it renders. And that's why whenever you go to the circling view in X-Plane, you circle around, it just sits there and jerks and stutters the first few times you do it, because it's loading in shaders for all the different things you can see as you move around the airplane. How anybody could design a system like this, I have no freaking idea. But that's what they did, and we've been paying for it with stutters ever since.
And the reason you used OpenGL back in the day
it was the best thing there was back in the day.
Because it worked on both
Mac, Windows, and Linux.
That's right.
Yeah, so it works on all platforms, and it was the best you could do back then.
The only other option was DirectX, and that only worked on
That would be
Windows.
Windows only, so it's a non-starter. Okay, let's say we want a texture, right? Textures are the wallpaper that we put on all the buildings and everything. We want a texture. We say, texture, please. And OpenGL says, oh, well, let me see if I can get that out of system memory and load it into video memory. Now, there's some other things in video memory, so let me get the other things in video memory out of the way, right? Because OpenGL's like, oh, I didn't know you need a runway texture. I mean, you're only in a flight sim. Who knew you need a runway texture? I didn't know you need that. And so it just pauses the sim, stops, waits to load the runway texture out of system memory, put it in video memory, and also dump anything in video memory back out to system memory. And there is literally not even a call that we can make to know if this is going to be necessary, to warn OpenGL that it's going to happen, to see if we're over our video limit. These things don't even exist. And so then it eventually puts the new texture in and renders after a pause. Let's say we want vertices. We have all these vertices, which is actual geometry, right? The little wireframe shape, the geometry of everything in the world. It exists in memory because we carefully designed all the buildings and airplanes and runways and scenery, and it's all this memory in the central memory of the computer. Then we copy it to the card. We tell OpenGL to draw it. And OpenGL says, oh, you mean you want to draw this? Well, let me just copy all that onto the card. Again, across from memory to card, and then now we're going to draw it. And so OpenGL is basically in a constant state of shock on what's going to happen next, even though it's happened at 50 times a second for the last 2 hours. It's still a shock that happens next time.
It's like that movie 50 First Dates.
Yeah, exactly. It's like 50 First Dates, where this is what Adam Sandler or whoever it was that lost their memory. That's OpenGL for you. Well, that ended for us in X-Plane about, what, 3 hours ago. 3 hours ago, 11.50 beta 1 came out.
Well, assuming you're not using something that doesn't support Vulkan, so
okay, yeah,
not everybody can just switch over.
Well then, okay, maybe they need to update hardware to support to get Vulkan.
Like add-ons like X Enviro.
Add-ons will have to, add-ons will have to
SkyMax.
catch up. Yeah, add-ons will have to catch up. I'm talking about X-Plane though. I'm doing X-Plane videos, not trying to cover every add-on. Okay, so this is the past up until 3 hours ago. Now let's talk about Vulkan. Us. As we are loading the simulator, the first time you loaded a new version of X-Plane, whenever you get a new version of X-Plane, it takes forever to load.
I noticed that with
but
Vulkan.
Only the first time.
I noticed that every time with Vulkan, when I would put it on a different machine to test it, and I would load it that first time, it would take 5 times longer to load the first time.
And then
I'm like, clearly it's doing something.
Oh yeah.
And prepping some shaders or whatever.
Exactly. And so the first time you load a new version of X-Plane, a new machine, we say, I want you to compile every damn shader right now. And the result of that compile, you freaking save it so you are never surprised when we ask for the shader again, right? It's like going up to kind of the doofy person like, what do you want me to do now, boss? It's like, I want you to be prepared for every eventuality right now. And so that first time you load X-Plane, it's slow because it's loading every single shader. It's compiling every single shader that could ever exist in the X-Plane world. And I say, load now, the first time you run X-Plane. What does Vulkan say? The only thing Vulkan ever says. Yes, sir, you got it. Everything that Vulkan does is a layer that's this thin in bytes and this thin in microseconds. Boom, sim is loaded. We just got through every single shader load and every single shader pause before you flew frame 1.
The first time you load X-Plane with Vulkan, that very first time, it takes 5 times longer, you're going through all of your stutters right then.
Yep.
That's all your stutters.
Yep, done.
One big long stutter.
Yep, exactly. It was the way I wish I could drive a car. I wish I have one red light at the beginning. That's I'm getting the temperature, getting the seat heat, getting the radio all tuned, and then green lights for the rest of the drive. That's what I want. We get that with X-Plane now, with Vulkan.
Gotcha.
Okay, what about textures? Here's how it works. Seeing as how I wrote a flight simulator, I had a good idea we might need a runway texture in video memory. In other words, we know what textures we're going to need as we approach new areas. We meaning X-Plane, and Laminar Research, control what texture goes in video RAM. We know how much video RAM there is. We know how big each texture is. We know where the hell the airplane is pointed. We know where the hell it's going. And so we are loading these textures before they are ever needed on a background thread, on a multi-thread. So rather than asking OpenGL, draw a runway, I'm just like, what? I didn't know you'd want to draw a runway. Well, let me see if I can find the texture. It's around here somewhere. Instead of all that crap, we know that runway's coming on up. We bring it into VRAM. We hold it there. Texture RAM, or texture, slam it into RAM. That's VRAM, I should say. Slam it into VRAM on the second thread so it's ready before we even have to use it. Vulkan says the only thing it ever says. Yes, sir. Boom. The texture we're actually going to use gets slammed into VRAM. How long did it take? 0. It was done on a background thread. And we did this before we ever actually needed to access it. It says primed up, ready to go. Then it's time to actually draw some stuff. Do we take a bunch of video or a bunch of 3D geometry data, kind of manipulate it in the CPU and in the system RAM and then copy it to the video card? No. We say, Vulkan, give me an address to the memory directly on the freaking card. I want an address to memory on the card, and I want 2,378 bytes of data, say, or some amount, okay? You have to specify the address. You have to specify, or you will be given an address, but you specify how many bytes of memory. You have to know in advance how much you're going to need. You get that amount of memory directly on the card. And then when you do the actual manipulation and whatnot of the geometry, you're working directly on the card.
Well, the good thing is geometry doesn't need a lot of memory. It's just it's a bunch of lines.
Right,
That's all it is.
Or points, really. It's actually connected points. But, so give me video memory. I want an address on the card, and I want a certain amount on the card, and I'm going to manipulate that memory directly. Vulkan says the only thing it ever says. Yes, sir. Boom, there's your fast render. No slow copying around. And so basically what Vulkan does, very specifically, is it forces us to, boom, do every shader at load. Boom, preload textures on background threads before they're ever needed. Boom, work directly in the card. And every one of these things is a little bit hard to code. You have to know what all your shaders are going to be before you get there. You have to know what textures you're going to use before you get to them. You have to know how many bytes of geometry are going to get drawn before you start drawing it and doing the math on it. So you can't just say, oh, let me just draw, polygons until I run out of, distance, No, you have to know everything you're going to draw before you draw byte 1, okay? And so all of this is harder because we have to know in advance what's going to happen so we can tell Vulkan in advance what's going to happen. So everything is set up and ready. So when it comes time to draw or to fly, the sim is loaded. Everything's primed on a background thread. You're operating directly on video memory. And it freaking flies. And what's the frame rate improvement you've seen?
Well, on AMD, it's been almost double the frame rate because they were operating on a pretty big penalty because their OpenGL driver was pretty bad.
Let's say slow.
Yeah, okay, slow, whatever. Slow is bad, but NVIDIA, it's 20 or 30%. Okay. I haven't tested every possible scenario, obviously. Right. What I did is I took a really fast processor and then, because I didn't want that to be the bottleneck, and ran a bunch of cards through it. The next thing I'll probably want to do is take a really fast card and run a bunch of processors through it and see if that makes a difference. But I don't think we're going to see near the variance on the processor side. Right. Now, a question I do have is on the US side. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is your first attempt, or whatever you want to call it.
12th attempt. It's our 12th attempt. There were 11 private betas that led up to this point.
Well, this is your first public one. Mm-hmm. What have you not done on the US side yet that's coming? Like, is there anything left to do?
Maybe. Here's what we can do. There is always more room. Okay, there may be some cases where we work on geometry in system memory and then send it to the card ourselves. If we can find those little edge cases, and it might be rare little things in the user interface or something, kind of the secondary stuff, but there may be a few places we can still find where you want to operate directly on video RAM. Maybe the UI gets a little faster or something like that. Maybe those cases aren't 100% addressed. Another thing, there's a little bit of strategy here, right? Let's say you're flying to New York. Are you willing to sacrifice your runway textures at LaGuardia to bring in your Central Park, textures and, Trade Center or Freedom Tower textures? So there's a little bit of strategy involved in preloading the best possible textures. Maybe you want to have textures at a higher resolution, but have fewer of them, and hope to God the guy doesn't suddenly make a 180-degree turn and show a whole bunch of new textures behind you, you see? So there's a lot of strategy on this side. And we got a guy named Sidney Just, not Ben, Sidney Just does this. He wrote that, and we have seen each beta get progressively faster as Sidney just dials in his technique on the optimum way to have just the right textures loaded at just the right resolution and always know just in advance what he's going to have to do. So he'll have all the textures moved in and out of memory on a background thread in advance. And so there's a certain amount of strategy here. And we may be able to refine this strategy over time. So there may be another couple percent still left as we refine the strategy, maybe.
Any idea when all these third-party people? I thought that's the reason.
I'm not going to try and answer third-party. Sorry, I can't. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
But I mean, Vulkan it's not something that Laminar Research invented. It's out there. It's out there for other people to use as they see fit.
People are familiar with the Doom franchise. There's actually a new Doom game that came out a couple of weeks ago. It runs on Vulkan. And in case people are wondering, how do I get Vulkan? All you do is download the latest drivers from NVIDIA or AMD for your graphics card, and you have Vulkan.
Got it. Okay. We have two questions I still want to advance. Why are we doing this? And Steam. All right, let me talk about why we're doing this. Everybody already knows faster is better because it's smoother. No question, we all like a faster sim. But there's two specific targets I'm trying to hit here. This is a mission. Okay, this is a mission. It has two very specific short-term targets and one long-term target. Short-term target number one, virtual reality, VR. VR breaks down if it runs too slow and if there's any stutters. I want to support VR fast, smooth, with no loss of sync between the two eyes, no stutters. This makes VR It takes VR from a science experiment to a freaking solid mainstream thing, something you can really count on working. With the high speed and the no pauses. It makes X-Plane better for VR. The other target I wanted to hit is professional sims. We're getting tremendous interest from the military. There's plenty of six-figure dollar, X-Plane sims in the world now that have multi-projectors, including the electric vertical takeoff and landing airplane I'm working on. We have a sim that is quite a bit bigger than this room, with all the projectors going around. So it's like being in a drive-in movie with a cockpit of our eVTOL, and then Xavion avionics. It's epic, absolutely epic. And we have all these projectors. If any one copy of X-Plane pauses, they get out of sync. And you see the horizon kind of break or split, right? Because one copy of X-Plane pauses, the other doesn't. The horizon breaks, realism is lost. So we need a non-pausing sim. And also, when you're looking at a drive-in movie projection of X-Plane, it better be fast, because any lack of frame rate is going to show up as jitters when everything is so big in front of you. You can see every last detail.
So will this improve networked? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it'll improve network. It'll improve the network experience, because you won't have one machine running slow or one machine pausing, and then let's say you're pulling up and the horizon moves up in one, but it stops for a fraction of a second in the other, so the horizon separates. You see, and so that should be addressed. One point I want to make is some people are still seeing some pauses, even in the Vulkan build.
Well, there can be latency in the network.
Well, yeah, there's latency. We don't let that slow us down, because we're always predicting what's going to happen based on the last messages we've gotten. Okay, so we don't let network latency slow us down. But one little source of pauses is actually due to Windows. The Windows operating system is screwing us all over a little bit here. In the next betas, we're going to find out how to work around or go around Windows itself dragging its feet and putting some pauses into this. So that's still in the works. So at any rate, the reason I'm doing it, what you already know is faster is better. It's a smoother experience, but there's two very specific short-term targets I'm trying to hit: virtual reality and high-end sims. There's a longer-term target I'm trying to hit, which is obviously ultimate scenery. And for us to go to ultimate high-def, incredible, amazing scenery, we need absolute total control of every texture, control of every vertex. We need to operate directly on the card, and everything needs to be preloaded, ready to go. We can't have ultimate scenery and use the OpenGL infrastructure with all the pausing and uncertainty and OpenGL's constant cluelessness that implies. So we had to rewrite the entire sim from the entire graphics. The entire graphics of the sim have been rewritten from the inside out to make this possible. But it's done, and it's paying off in spades. And we are hitting both the short-term targets now, which is better virtual reality and better professional platform experience. And we will, of course, when the time is right, unveil the next generation of scenery, which of course we're working on. So that's why we're doing it. Now let's talk about Steam. When do we get Steam? Steam went live about 10 minutes ago. We pulled the trigger as I was driving on out here.
Steam is always 3 or 4 hours behind.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
what we've decided is that Steam will always run about 3 or 4 hours behind Laminar Research. Why is that, do you think?
Well, in case people start screaming that, oh my God, it's crashing all my computers.
Exactly.
You can at least sort of throttle it a little bit.
Right, exactly. So here's what we're going to do. And this will be standard practice from here on out. This is Laminar Research policy. Here it comes. We always do the version first at our website at Laminar Research. We wait for maybe 3-4 hours, maybe a day, a half a day, something like that. Wait for some time to at least let a couple hundred or a couple thousand people install it, run it, and find out if it's breaking for everybody. If it's not breaking for everybody, boop, we push the little button that pops it over to Steam. So Steam's going to be between a few hours and maybe a day behind. And that's going to be standard policy moving forwards. One thing I want to point out. You do need to choose betas in Steam if you want 1150 in Steam. Do you know how to choose a beta in Steam?
Not in Steam.
Okay. You right-click on your X-Plane icon on your Steam desktop. A Properties menu drops down. And in the Properties menu, from your X-Plane icon that you right-clicked on, you select a little checkbox, I want my betas. And once you check that little box, the next time you launch Steam, it will automatically update to the latest beta. So you're not going and running the Xplane install or anything like that on Steam. You're checking the little box that says, yes, I always want the latest beta, and it's going to be loaded, uncommanded, whenever you fire it up.
And if you ever want that to stop, you have to go do that again.
Uncheck the checkbox for beta. Right-click, Properties, uncheck the beta checkbox, and then you will be sticking with that build that you have now or up to the latest non-beta build, and that way you avoid bugs, but you're, 30 days behind everybody else.
Because this is a beta that probably more people want to try than any other.
Right.
But maybe after this beta, maybe not so many people should have that checked.
Maybe.
If they don't want to run into possible problems.
Yeah, but remember, the beta is going to get solider and solider with each successive
I'm
release.
saying like 1170 or whatever.
Right, yeah.
Whatever.
Well, okay, yeah. We'll do a separate presentation when we get there. I'm focusing on 1150 right now, other than the groundwork that we're laying for future versions of Xplane. So at any rate, that's what I wanted to say. That's how Vulkan works. That's why it took a while. We had to redo our entire graphics from the inside out. Those are the targets we're trying to hit. And now you can get it on Steam as well.